And how did that carry over to where we are today when it comes to marketing? You said the American dream is still some twisted version of that's old, is still in the consciousness, but
Well, no, it does interest me about the American dream, which is that it was partly a dream because everybody else was having a bit of a nightmare.
Yeah, definitely.
And it's also interesting because I don't think, barring some strange nuclear catastrophe, I don't think you're ever going to see one country being that much relatively richer than everyone else, or at least relatively better in terms of quality of life. Now, the reason I raise all these questions about instrumental inequality is I would argue that we ought to now start looking for improvements in quality of life. Now, bear in mind, this is going to sound like weirdly left-wing. It's simply pragmatic, okay? We should start to look to improve people's life with greater amounts of leisure rather than necessarily with greater amounts of money.
Okay.
Because at some point, if the money is being spent in a way that is either completely rivalrous, the property market, essentially just inflated because people are competing for scarce commodities, zero-sum game, okay? The washing machine was not a zero-sum game.
Right.
Okay, that was, that's an enormous benefit. Now, here's a great thought experiment, okay? If you ask people, it's Robert H. Frank, who wrote a book called The Darwin Economy, fantastic economist and evolutionary psychologist. If you ask people, would you rather live in a world where you earned £50,000 a year and everybody else earned 30? Or would you rather live in a world where you earned £80,000 a year and everybody else earned 100? Okay. Quite a lot of people choose the first. And the reason they choose the first is not irrational, because relative wealth, in some respects, if you're trying to attract the opposite sex, for instance, if you want to buy beachfront housing, okay, may be much more important than absolute wealth. In fact, when you go to Ogilvy, what's slightly painful about Ogilvy is the chief executive of Ogilvy in London and the chief executive of Ogilvy in New York probably have the worst quality of life, I would argue, objectively, of any major senior person in Ogilvy. If you're the head of Ogilvy in a Latin American country, okay, you don't earn as much as the person in New York does, but your house is bloody spectacular, okay, right? It's on some cliff overlooking a tropical beach, whereas the person in New York's, they've got a nice apartment, but it's nothing to write home about. Now, if you ask just a different question, which is, would you rather live in a world where you had 4 weeks vacation and everybody else got 5, or would you rather live in a world where you got 6 weeks vacation and everybody else got 8? Sorry, have I got that right?
Yeah.
Most people say I'd rather live in the 6-week vacation world,
right,
because vacation is not a relative status good, it's an absolute good, and more of it is better than less, regardless of what everybody else has. So leisure time is a good. It's not a competitive, rivalrous good like money is for chasing property, I would argue, personally, I think the whole travel industry has gone batshit crazy, okay? In that, for young people who have anyone, hey, cars aren't really a status thing anymore. In fact, I don't own a car. Right? Okay.
Is that your young voice?
Sorry, my young person voice. I don't even own a car. I probably belong to a car club. Okay, and I think it was now.
But they use travel.
But they use travel as a status indicator. Right. I think if you went to university now, and you'd never been anywhere long haul, you'd be at a significant mating disadvantage to some git who'd been to Machu Picchu. And so they just have different, the status competition is the same, the currency changes.
Okay.
Now, I asked an audience of millennials and young folk in a room once, all London resident, okay, how many of you have been to Machu Picchu? And then I asked, how many of you have been to see Lincoln Cathedral? And the ratio was about 2 or 3 to 1. Machu Picchu. Now, you can go to Lincoln Cathedral in the day from London, okay? Now, okay, whatever you want to say. 1, you don't get altitude sickness, okay? 2, architecturally, it's a lot better than Machu Picchu, right? Thirdly, I'm not even sure watching a 4K documentary on Machu Picchu wouldn't be more valuable than actually going there, to be absolutely honest. Now, so the really interesting thing there is that leisure is something people enjoy for its own sake, whereas money, I think, is increasingly something people enjoy for the business of pursuing personal status and rivalry, which is a zero-sum game.
Okay, and that affects the way we market to people today.
Well, I think we've got to ask questions. We've got to start asking questions about I mean, there are economists. I mean, weirdly, there's a strange economic movement called something like post-scarcity luxury communism,
Okay.
which essentially says that we become so efficient at manufacturing and distributing goods that that nearly everybody in the world who wants to will eventually be able to live a life of considerable opulence. Okay. Now, at that point, you actually need to introduce communism, essentially, in order to simply because.
Money doesn't motivate anyone.
Or what you might end up with is absurd inequalities of wealth.
Okay. We'll see if we get there.